감사합니다. So welcome everybody. 안녕히 계십시오. Welcome everyone. I'm Lawrence Moroney. I'm here today to talk about Firebase, and as we saw a little bit earlier on, some of the stuff that Google has been doing in Firebase. And you're probably here because you create applications or you create websites, and these can be very lucrative. These can be great opportunities for you to succeed, but we also believe that to be able to succeed in these, everybody faces some challenges. Now, the type of challenges developers typically face in building apps or sites are time. It takes a lot of time to build the right app. It takes a lot of time to put great graphics into the app. It takes a lot of time to build a back end into the app. Resources. You can always do it more developers. You can always do it more time. You can always do it better tools and better services. Developers, we also find, speaking of tools, tend to manage dozens of different tools, tend to have to deal with lots of different tools, from putting stuff onto the web to mobile apps to deploying to App Store or Play Store, and who knows what else. There's so many things that you have to deal with. One of the biggest challenges I've personally found in developing applications is the back-end infrastructure. The amount of work that I have to do to build sometimes very simple plumbing to support my own application. I have a session this afternoon where I'll step through a game that I've been building and how the architecture of that game has changed from a web-based backend through to a cloud-based backend through to backend as a service using Firebase. Hopefully you'll be able to come and see that and see how greatly something like Firebase can simplify the infrastructure behind an app. And then, of course, the process of building an app. Our goal at Google is to make that as easy as possible for you, to make it simple for you to do everything that you need to do so that you can focus on making your app successful and making your app the best that it can be. So with all this in mind, over the last 18 months, we have been working on Firebase. And we've been working on Firebase to build it out to support developers in these ways. First of all, great technologies that will allow you to develop your app. Mobile backend as a service, quality services, all the things that allow you to build better apps. Then, once you've built your app, you can't just release it into the wild. You can't just release it into the Play Store or the App Store or the web and expect everybody to come to it. We believe that there are technologies and there are methodologies, and we've started building these out that will allow you to acquire customers and it will allow you to re-engage customers that you may have previously acquired. And then finally, once you've done all of this, once you've put your app out, once you're growing your app through acquiring customers and re-engaging them, of course you want to earn from that. So we've put some technologies together for that. And then finally, wrapping all of this together, because we believe your decisions about how you can build your best app, how you can grow your app, and how you can work from that, these decisions need to be powered by analytics. So what I'm going to do is, there's 15 technologies here, so I'm going to rapidly go through each of these 15 technologies so that we can learn a little bit about each one. Maybe some of them will be good for you, maybe all of them will be good for you. And the nice thing about Firebase is you can choose what you want to use. You don't have to use everything. So I'll start with analytics. As we saw earlier on, it's really been designed for apps. It's all about events in your app and users that are using your app. The neat thing about it, and as you'll see when I go through each of the Firebase technologies, is that analytics connects everything across Firebase. And immediately after the keynote, one of our product managers, Fontaine, will be coming on and she'll be doing a deep dive into analytics. I recommend you stay for that because there's some great stuff in there. And the one thing that I would also like to emphasize, and the one thing that most people like about the analytics in Firebase, is that it is free and it is unlimited. There is no cost to you to use it, and it's unlimited in the type of things that you can do with it. Here's an example, a quick example of some analytics that a Googler wrote a game and put a game out onto the Play Store. And here's some of the analytics that came out of the game. So you can see things like, the monthly active users on the Android version and on the iOS version. And what was really neat about all this data that he got was that he wrote 0 lines of code to get this. So when you link the analytics libraries into your application when you build it, you will get a whole bunch of things being measured for you without you writing any code whatsoever. One of the things we always hear about developers, as I was saying earlier on, time and resource constrained, and it's like we would love to be able to measure our application, we'd love to be able to see what our application is doing, but we don't have the time to build it. With that in mind, when we designed Firebase Analytics, we wanted to give you a great on-ramp, a great set of data that you can measure in your app, a console which you can use to slice and dice and see what's going on in your app, and to do all of that without you writing any code and without you paying any money. Now, if you do want to write code, and like me, I love writing code, there are a whole bunch of other things. You can do custom analytics. You can add things that measure things that are specific to your application, and we'll be seeing that a little bit later today. So let's talk about the technologies for developing your app. So these were the things on the left here. So I've divided into two categories. One is back-end services, so this is mobile back-end as a service, and one is quality services, so things that you can use to make your app better once you've already built it. So the first one is the Firebase Realtime Database. Now, to me, this is one of the biggest productivity tools in Firebase because I've been building a mobile backend. I've been building a game that requires a mobile backend, and usually on a mobile backend, even if you want to do the simplest things with data, you got to write a service and you got to write an API for handling loading data into your database, editing data, updating it, deleting it, all of these things, and it's a lot of work for you to build and maintain that type of backend. The idea behind the real-time database in Firebase is that it gives you all of this as a service. Very little code that you write in your application, and I'll be showing the exact code in my afternoon session. But then also building on top of that, things such as synchronization and conflict resolution. Now, those are pretty big words, but what they really mean is if you have multiple devices, as many of us do, we may have a phone, we may have a tablet, we may have a wearable, and each of these are adding to the data or editing the data in the application. We need to be able to synchronize across all of these. And the Firebase backend database, the real-time database, does this for you automatically. So you're not thinking about writing code for managing that kind of synchronization. And the bottom line here, as I say, is you're accessing it directly from your app. You don't need to write a back-end service. You don't need to wrap that back-end service with an API. It's simple code that you write in your app. It's just like if you were using a database in the app itself, except your database is hosted in the cloud. And here's a simple graphic just showing the type of synchronization that I was talking about. If you've got multiple devices, or if you've got, maybe you have a web app, you have a mobile app, you have a mobile app, you have a wearable app, all these kind of things, you can synchronize the data in real time using the backend database. And not only that, if you get disconnected, then what will happen is once you reconnect, it's able to synchronize the data back in once you've reconnected. So you can have data and you can have a realistic app working in an offline state that will then resync once you come back online. Authentication is one thing that a lot of people talk to us about, that they want to be able to customize their application. When a user signs into the application, they want to have a custom experience. But building authentication systems is very, very hard. And it's getting harder and harder all the time as more and more people out there are trying to hack into systems, more and more people are trying to get into your systems to steal your customers' user identifiable data and all of that kind of stuff. So what we built in Firebase was authentication as a service. So the idea is three things. Number one, if you have an existing authentication system, you can bring that to Firebase, you can integrate that to Firebase, and it can work seamlessly. Number two, if you want to use well-known providers such as Facebook or Twitter or GitHub or Google, of course, and if you want to use if your users want to sign in with these things and sign into your application and then have a custom experience in your application, they can do so. What's really neat about that is that you don't own any back-end authentication infrastructure. You don't have to manage that infrastructure. You don't have to worry about that infrastructure because that's all been built and hosted for you. And then, of course, if you want to have your own existing email and password authentication so that you can keep track of your users too, this also works within Firebase. So, and we also provide an out-of-the-box user interface for that, so you don't need to think about building your own user interface on top of it. But of course, if you want to, and if you want a custom interface with your own branding, you can do so. One very simple but very powerful technology in Firebase is Firebase hosting. If you've ever deployed an app to the iOS App Store or to the Google Play Store, you usually need a web page associated with that. But maybe that web page, if you're mobile first and mobile only, that's the only web page maybe that you will ever need. So in this case with Firebase hosting, we offer a facility where you can serve static assets. HTML, CSS, JavaScript, all the kind of things for a static website. You can serve that secure over SSL. It's done by default on this. And you can have custom domains mapped to this. So instead of thinking about renting web space somewhere or renting cloud space somewhere and dealing with uploading files to that and dealing with maintaining that, all of this can be done for you within your Firebase console also. Related to this is storage. So if you build an application that you want to allow your users to store files, maybe they upload videos, maybe they upload photographs, and you need to build something that will give your users some storage space, Firebase Storage will allow you to do this. It's easy file storage, it's all coded within your mobile app or within your web app, but some of the things that happen when this works as a service, for example, is poor connectivity. What happens if you're building an app and your user has to upload, for example, a very large file, and they have disconnections as they're walking down the street or going onto the subway or things such as that? You don't want to write the code to handle the handshaking for this, to handle what happens if my app is half uploaded. Do I restart? Do I give a hostile experience to my user? So we've built a lot of this into Firebase with Firebase Storage. This is all built upon Google Cloud Storage, which is a technology we've had for some time, which is a scalable back-end storage technology. If you want to learn more about Google Cloud Storage, there is a Google Cloud booth out back, and I recommend go talk with the folks there, and they will tell you a lot of the great stuff that Google Cloud Storage can do for you, and Firebase Storage is built on top of this. Perhaps my favorite, or one of my favorites at least, is Firebase Cloud Messaging. Now, the idea behind this is that it allows you to build a solution whereby you can send messages and notifications to your users at no cost to you. These notifications can be delivered in nearly real time to connected devices, and you can use them to drive user interaction. Now, what makes this really fun is how your messages can be addressed to your users. First of all, you can address an individual user. So if you, when a user registers with Google Cloud Messaging, they get a registration ID. And if you want to address a specific single device, you can do so. If you want to address a group of devices, you can do so. If you want to address a specific version of an app, so for example, if somebody has version 1 of your app and you've upgraded to version 2, you can do so. Or my personal favorite is that apps and devices can subscribe to specific topics. So, for example, if you are building a weather application, now I'm sure everybody here is interested in the weather in Seoul, Korea, but they're not so interested in the weather in Dublin, Ireland. So what you can do is you could build your application so that users in Seoul, Korea would subscribe to a topic, weather in Seoul, Korea, that you define, and users in Ireland would subscribe to a topic, weather in Dublin, Ireland. And then say there's going to be a big storm coming, which could impact the power. You then, as the app owner, could send notifications to just the people in Seoul, Korea, and the folks in Dublin, Ireland wouldn't need to worry about a storm here, and vice versa. So that's what we mean by versatile message targeting. You can build your application so that notifications can be delivered in all these different ways. Not only that, there's more. Notifications can also be sent upstream from a device, which you can then use to build maybe a chat application or perhaps even games. So the next one, and it's one that I'll be showing this afternoon that I used in my own game, is remote configuration. And what's really interesting about this is that when you start thinking and architecting your applications to use back-end as a service, there are new scenarios that open up for you. And remote configuration is a very simple but very powerful one, where what this is effectively variables within your app that you can host on the server. So this allows you to then do something such as modifying your application without redeploying it, if you've built your application that way. So if you build your app to read variables from the back end, from the remote configuration, you can change the behavior of your application by amending these variables on the server side, and you as the application owner can define the variables on the server side, or you can, when it gets really fun and interesting, is you can link it with analytics. So let me give an example of this. So say you're building an application for e-commerce, where you're selling stuff on the internet, and if you're selling to people in Korea, you're charging one fixed amount for shipping. But if people from the United States want to buy your stuff, you're charging a different amount of shipping to the United States. And sometimes it can be very expensive to ship things overseas, and as a result, you may not have that many customers in the United States. So say you want to have a sale, and on the sale you'll say, we're going to give free shipping to people in the United States, or we're going to give heavily discounted shipping to people in the United States. Then on your remote variables, on your server variable, you could specify the price of shipping to the United States, but when you integrate it with analytics, you could say, for this week, anybody who's coming in from the United States, don't give them this value in the variable, give them this value in the variable. And as a result, your application will modify itself automatically without you needing to redeploy it. So in this afternoon's session, there's a game that I built, and you'll see where I'm able to change. It has an animated character in it, and she speaks English, but by setting a remote configuration variable, I change it for the animated character to speak Korean. So come along this afternoon, and you can see this in action. So next up is the test lab for Android. Now, what I love about this one, and some of the feedback that I've heard about this one, is that often we want to be able to test our applications on devices that are not available in our country. So the idea behind the test lab for Android is that Google hosts many, many, many different devices for you in the cloud. We have virtual machines as well as physical machines. And then once you've built your app, if you want to see what it looks like on all of these different devices without you buying these devices, and maybe sometimes you may not even be able to buy them even if you wanted to, then the idea is you can test it, you can get reports back on how your application behaves on all of these devices, you can get screenshots, etc., etc. You can define your own custom tests, so if you want people to use an application in a specific way, you can do so. But there's also what we call robo-tests, where the idea is that in our infrastructure, we've built something to test every UI item, type text into something, push buttons, all that type of thing, to see how your application will behave. And of course, like every developer, I always have crashes. When I build an application, and I've tested my application, and I think everything works, but then I send it out and real people start using it, things go wrong, crashes happen. And crashes are really bad in this mobile world because crashes will impact how people review your application. And the number one reason that we see negative reviews for apps happening is that an app crashed or an app didn't behave as expected. So crashes are unavoidable, so we want to make it as easy as possible for you to fix crashes quickly. Now, if a crash happens on a device that's connected to your development machine, you can take a look at the call stack, you can examine it, you can figure out what happened. But if a crash usually happens when somebody's using your device on the other side of the world, it's a lot harder to do that kind of debugging. So in Firebase, we've integrated crash reporting, and what this does is it uploads a detailed stack of why the app crashed, where the app crashed, and how the app crashed, so that you can learn from it, you can fix it, and you can deploy a new version. And guess what? It's integrated with analytics. So again, you can start using analytics. If you're getting a lot of crashes coming in, you can start filtering who's getting the crashes, why they're getting them, where they're getting them, how they're getting them, that type of thing. So that's a brief tour of the technologies for building an application. So now let's take a look at growing your application and growing your business around it. Now, the first thing is that a great way to learn about applications is that friends tell you about these apps. Friends tell you about great apps. There's an app taking the world by storm at the moment called Pokemon Go. And I personally learned about this application by a friend of mine posting on Facebook that his wife was taking a road trip, and the reason why she was taking a road trip was that she wanted to find Pokemons that she couldn't find in her hometown. And this is how I learned about the app. No advertising, no marketing, anything like that. A friend told me about it. And when you build apps, we want to make it easy for you to build apps where your users tell their friends about your app and how great your app is. So from a development perspective, we designed this drop-in widget that you just drop into your application, and it builds app sharing into your application. So people can then share your app via text messages or via email. we put a little bit of intelligence behind this as well. So then if your user wants to share the app with their friends, then it will give suggested friends based on other apps that your friends have used, other apps that you're using, and the relationship between you and this friend, so that you can have more success in sharing applications. And it's built on the dynamic links technology that Ben showed in the keynote, and it's this one where you can then send a URL to somebody, and then the experience of getting that app and installing that app is as seamless as possible. Now, what do I mean by this? So, for example, in the past, I could say, this is a great app, and send the name of that application to my friend. But then what does my friend do? They go online, they search for that application, they go into the Play Store, they search for that application, they touch the install button, they install the application, and they get it. But they've lost all context about why I shared it with them. So, for example, if I have a recipe app and there's a recipe for something that my friend I know would love to eat, and I would share, hey, check out this recipe in this application, by the time the person has launched the application, they're not looking at that recipe anymore. So the idea behind dynamic links is that a specific link within an application, they can then share that screen in the application with somebody else. And when they're taken through the entire install flow from that one link, not only do they get the application and launch it, they can launch it directly into the screen that they were looking at. It's a much richer sharing experience. And guess what? It's linked with analytics. So of course, as you can take a look at the effectiveness of sharing, you can take a look at the effectiveness, maybe you're putting buttons into your application for sharing, or you're providing messages to your users, or an incentive to your users to share, and based on how it performed, you can tell from analytics if you're doing it the right way, or if there's a better way for you to do that. Google AdWords, you're probably all very familiar with, and we've made it as easy as possible for you to use this still within Firebase. It's all about universal app campaigns so that you can advertise your app to other people, and it can target the correct audience, it can target people who are using apps similar to yours, and it can track conversions, and it can optimize for you so that you're not wasting your advertising spend on your applications. Another one, which I have a session about this technology this afternoon, and this one's a really unique technology, and it's if I have a favorite in Firebase, it's probably this one. Now, it's called app indexing. Now, the idea behind this is it revolutionizes how people can discover your app or how people can engage with your app. So typically today, if you go onto a search box and you start searching for something, you're finding content on the internet. But you may already have that content locked up in an application on your phone. The idea behind app indexing is that it opens up the content in your app to the search box. So looking at my recipe example earlier on, and in the session this afternoon I'll talk about the recipe sample, now it's a case of I may have installed an application that has 100 different recipes in it 6 months ago. And I've forgotten all about this application. You got lots of applications on your phone. This one's sitting in my app drawer somewhere, and I've totally forgotten about it. Now I go onto Google, and I start searching for a great recipe for bulgogi, and what happens? I just take a look at various links to various websites with recipes for that, but I have a great one already in my application. If that application was indexed in the same way as the web is indexed, then that content could be found while I'm doing my search. And that's what app indexing is all about. It's a very, very simple technology that allows you as app builders to get the content in your apps into the search index, so then when your users are searching for that content, they can find it in your app instead of constantly forgetting about your app and leaving your app while they just search to find stuff on the web. Not only that, then once you're using this within your app, there's an API so that as users interact with content in your application, then they are sending signals to Google to say they are interested in this type of content. So then for future searches, it will be more likely that they'll find the content in your app as opposed to searching on the web for it. Notifications are very closely related to the cloud messaging that I spoke about earlier on. But what's cool about these is that they're much lighter weight for you as a developer. In fact, you can get a great notifications experience in your apps without writing any line of code whatsoever. And the concept then is on the Firebase console, you can then send notifications to your users, and you can target your users in the same way that I spoke about earlier on. You can target them based on app version, you can target to individual users, you can target to topics, all of those type of things. Now, what's nice about this one, and the primary goal of this is for re-engagement. So again, you have this scenario where you've built your application, you've deployed your application, you've marketed it, you've gotten lots of people to install it, but then 6 months later, nobody is using it. With the notifications console within Firebase, you can then send messages to these users that Android or iOS will then render notifications to these users that will allow them to launch your application and go directly into it. You can do this with 0 lines of code on Android for a basic notification, and then if you want to start doing some custom notifications, maybe to target them to a specific screen or some of those kind of things, there's very, very little code which you need to write. We're talking 5 or 6 lines of code. Again, our philosophy is to allow you to be successful by making your job as simple as possible. So those are the developed technologies, and those are the grow technologies. And then the last one I just want to talk about is earning, and how do you earn money? So AdMob by Google, we're probably all familiar with it. It's a way that you can create adverts, and you can use adverts within your application. Now, you don't want to turn your users off by having the wrong adverts. So the technology behind AdMob is very engaging. It's very custom towards your user. So then if you want, for example, to have a video ad, or if you want to have an interstitial ad, or if you want to have a native ad, then the ad inventory in Google will be matched to what your users do, what your users like, so that they will get relevant to apps. So if they're playing a game for like car racing, for example, they're not going to receive an advert for baby diapers. So it's, the idea is we want to make it as good as possible for you to provide as rich as possible an experience for your users. Right now, there are over 1 million applications using this technology, and like with everything else, we've integrated this into the Firebase SDK so that you have a single, coherent experience in building your applications. So that's it. That's a quick tour of Firebase. It's our set of tools that we've designed to let you develop high-quality apps, grow your user base, and hopefully earn some money out of all of this. Our goal was really to cover the essentials, to build services that you can then build on top of so that you can focus on your users and you can focus on your business. Kamsahamnida.